Okay, so I'm going to show you how to make a template or the kind of core framework of all the tools we'll be using. This is the diagram I showed you in class. In a sense, there's this kind of feedback loop between a stimulus and your perception and your understanding of what the stimulus was, and there's a loop of design that happens as a result. We're going to try to concretely manifest this as grabbing input as geometry, creating something with it, analyzing that creation, and then representing everything through an interface. That then chains into the process of design. So, you go into Rhino and Grasshopper. The first thing you need to have is actually an external plugin called Flounder Camera Control. If you Google for Flounder Camera Control, it's a plugin for Grasshopper that I made. It should be one of the first results on Google, and you should be able to find this page on Food for Rhino, which is a page that has all the plugins for Rhino and Grasshopper. You can download version 0.2. Download it. You should have it. Open the file. Extract it into a folder, or you can double click on it and open it. And you'll have these three files then that you want to directly drag them into the Grasshopper window. And when you do that, they'll be added. They're up here in a tab called Flounder, and there are these three components. Now in a nutshell, this given a viewport name, it'll get the location of the camera, where it's looking at, its the focal length of the lens, what direction is up. This, given that information, will set a camera, and this will sync to viewports. You can create this by, connecting the input of one camera, the output of one camera to the input of another. But for our intents and purposes, this is what we want. Now, just to go back to the diagram, we want to grab some geometry, create something, analyze it, represent it. So I'll show you how to grab geometry. It's there's a component called the geometry pipeline, which is under geometry here. And it's very convenient. It takes a layer, a name of geometry. Each object in Rhino has a name, believe it or not. And the type, whether you want a point, a curve, a B-rep, actually I think this is a B-rep or a mesh. And you can decide whether you want locked objects or hidden objects, which is really convenient because if you lock an object, then the geometry pipeline will not grab it. The same goes for hidden. You can also group by layer, which will be incredibly useful in the future. But for the time being, let's make a layer in Rhino that we call input. Let's call it input 1. And let's all call a layer that's called input 2. And actually, because that's not so descriptive, let's call this input points 1. Let's call this input points 2. And just to start us off, I'm going to make a bunch of points. An input points 2 and an input points 1. They're different colors, so it's easy to see which is which. Great. So what Geometry Pipeline does over here in the Grasshopper window is if you give it a layer, it'll grab everything on that layer. So I can say input points 1. Make sure you don't have a space. And then it should give me all the geometry, but not yet because I haven't yet told it what it should look for. I can either right click and select points, or I can double click. So when you do that, it'll grab me all the points on input points 1. I could do the same for input points 2. I've just copy and pasted here. Copy, paste. Points 2. Now, the fun thing about Geometry Pipeline, which will be helpful, is it also uses wildcards. So I can say input points star, and it will grab all the points. Or you can imagine I could just say input star. So if I have another layer called input curves, it'll grab that also, which will be helpful because you can grab different aspects or different layers at a time. The geometry pipeline, the reason why this is really helpful is you don't have to go back into Grasshopper. When you're operating, you can just create a point, it automatically grabs it. You can see by the red X, it will just grab it. When you delete a point, it just deletes it. You don't have to go in, which means that you can close Grasshopper and kind of pretend that it doesn't exist, create new interfaces altogether. Now, we have this geometry, and let's say for the purposes of this demo, we're just going to make polyline out of these curves, out of these points, because I've put them in a random order. They're a little bit randomly ordered. The order in which the points are connected is a little arbitrary, but that's okay. This is for the purposes of our presentation anyways. And let's say around input points 2, I actually make some spheres around them just for fun. And let's say the spheres want to be bigger. Now obviously anything can happen here in the kind of processing aspect of things. And this area is essentially grab geometry, the first aspect we're talking about. This area, we're going to create, form, process, do stuff effectively. Over here, we'll do some analyses and represent it. Eventually. And you can see I'm just modeling again this process over here. So we're doing something, and this will probably be a large portion. You could do anything, and we'll go into that in more detail later, but this is essentially your Grasshopper project or your processing. Let's say I also want to extrude this curve. So extruded by, extruded in the Z direction. Let's actually say extruded by the radius of the spheres. Let's analyze it. So for the walls, let's just grab the length of the line on the ground. So I'm going to look at the length of the curve over here, show it within a panel, which that's a shortcut, the quotation mark where I could type panel. And panel. And just so you know, there are many different kind of lengths, but so that's 733 units. I think this is inches, so 733 inches. I can also grab the spheres. Let's say I get the volume of the spheres, which it turns out to be all these different numbers. I am going to add them all together with mass addition. So I get that. Great. And let's say for the length, I want to grab all the points and get an average. And actually, this is a kind of fun shorthand. If I pipe the geometry, which all the points, into an average, I get one single point. So it's getting an average of all the points. Actually, it's getting an average of the x values, the y values, and the z values. So it gives me the center point, which is a convenient shorthand. And I say I want a text tag. I want some sort of text tag. Actually, I want a 3D or a 2D one. It's a little bit simpler. And I want the location of the text to be at the point. I want the text to be this. You can see. And I want the size or the color to be something else. I'm going to actually look for a 3D text tag. That way I can specify the location, the text, and I can modify the size of it. I can change the color. I'm going to say color picker. Plug that into a color, so the color of the text is changing. And then I can also figure out the justification, bottom left, bottom right, but that's okay for now. For this, I could do the same. But in fact, instead of the mass addition, let's say I just actually want the volumes of each sphere. I'm going to get another 3D text tag. I'm going to say the locations of it are going to be at the centroids of all the volumes. The text is going to be the volume number, and I'm going to use the same color to shade it. If I want wonderful cyan, that's what I get. I've actually mixed the analysis and representation, so I'm going to move these guys over here because I've analyzed things and now I'm just representing them. And I'm using the preview tag to get a preview of the object. So I'm going to get the extrusion and color it with this color. I'm going to get this volume and also do the same thing. The spheres, that is. Oops. So now everything is colored together. Actually, I'm going to make the geometry a different color than the text. Make them slightly transparent. And other than the preview and the tag functions, I'm going to hide everything. So I'm going to Control A, right click, middle click, go to disable preview, and then I'm going to enable the preview just for these objects. The text is embedded a little bit in the ball, but let's not worry about that. So what's going on here? I'm grabbing the geometry, I'm creating the form process, I'm doing some stuff, I'm analyzing, I'm also representing within an interface. So if I create a point, you can see that the wall is being created, the number in the center denotating the length of the wall is moving around. I can grab these points and delete them, figures that out. Same thing goes for this layer. I can add more spheres, I can delete them. And if you could imagine that if I'm making some sort of maze, that this would be a helpful tool just to know the length of the maze or the length of the walls, or something like that. And the last thing I'm going to show you in relation to the camera control is how these things connect together. So I showed you in the course a way to sync viewports so that they rotate together, so you can have, in some sense, interface and representational world. So let's do that. What I'm going to do is we're going to go into the view and we're going to modify the name of the view. Let's call this view, I'm going to set it to the perspective first. To have two perspective views, I'm going to call it model view. I'm going to I ended up calling this model view instead. That's okay. I'll switch this to model view. I'm going to call this render view, or render view. That seems like a good name. So I have two views. They can note that they can have different viewport settings. So I could have the model view be rendered, or I could have this be X-ray, while render view is technical and vice versa, but we're not there quite yet. So one thing we want to do is, we want to sync up the viewports together so that they rotate together. So go to the Flounder camera view tab and grab the sync Flounder camera icon. This should be self-explanatory and relatively simple. You have an activate, so I'm going to get a toggle, plug that in. I have the source viewport, which I'm going to plug into the source viewport. And then I have the destination viewport, which I'm going to set as render view. Make sure you don't have any spaces or anything. And then if I set this to true, you can notice that the render view syncs up to the model view. However, if I move this, it doesn't follow. Why is that? Well, it's because this component is only running once. If I toggle it again, it'll run again. So I need to set what is called a timer. And I click on the arrow, the red arrow, and I connect it to anything. Whatever it connects it to, it will recalculate or recompute every often. So this will recompute every 1 second. So as I'm moving this around, I'll recompute 1 second, which is great, but too slow. So you can right click on it, go to interval, and say, I want it to recompute every 20 milliseconds. You can manually enter a faster interval, like 2, I think. But it looks like there's other computation going on, or my computer has some other stuff going on in the background, so it's a little slow. But regardless, you can see how now effectively the two viewports are being synced up. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do is I am going to use the preview function and also the remote control panel to show you how to work with inputs and kind of fully use the Grasshopper and Rhino connection as an interface. So one last thing, you notice that we have this preview component that is responsible for taking all the geometry and coloring it. What the preview component also has, if you right click on it, is a viewport filter that lets you specify only which viewport to show the objects in. So if you type render view, which is the name of our render view, it will show the objects only in the render view. So this way I have a distinction between what I'm doing and what that result is. This also means that I can, have different modes of operation, different ways to show the interface for the model view and a kind of output view and the render view on the right hand side. So for example, let's say these dots are too small and I really want to see which ones are the spheres and which ones are the polyline or the wall dots. So I could go over here and grab just the input points for the balls, or the spheres, and create some new geometry, grab the geometry, make a sphere, maybe have them be a sphere of radius 10. And so you see these spheres are created. This is a relic from a previous thing, so I'll delete that. And then I'll take this geometry and preview it. I'll hide this. So now, and I'll make sure that for this viewport, for this preview object, the viewport filter is set to auto view. And just for consistency's sake, I'll move this over to the representation side of things. And I'm going to delete some things and clean this up a little bit. You get the idea. But so I have now, on one hand, these kind of spheres that are really working as like little interface help. You can think of them not as actually geometry, but a way to tell me, oh hey, move the pink things. The pink things moving around will move these balls. If you move these things around, the wall moves as well. The last thing I want to talk about is the remote control panel. This is a relatively new tool that's been created. So what you can do with any slider or any component is to, let me specify any slider or panel, or there are a lot of things that can be used, but you can right click on them and say publish to remote panel. Now, it hasn't shown up yet, but if you go into Grasshopper and click on remote control panel in the view menu, it opens this window up that is kind of within Rhino and kind of within Grasshopper. You can actually move it over and have it as a separate tab. Let me just arrange this around so that we can better see what we're dealing with. And I'm actually going to close the layers screen. So you notice that this radius item has gone in here, and if I move this around, the radius, this number will change as well. If I go and edit the slider to use rational numbers instead of natural numbers or integers, then this does as well. This is actually varying these spheres, so this is actually not the item we want, in which case we can click on the edit panel tool and you can drag this off, or I believe you can also just hit the delete key. What we really want is we want this item, so we'll right click and publish to remote panel. So then, oh sorry, we're still in edit mode, and within edit mode I could right click on, say, the group item and call this group input. And so if I edit this, or if I slide this around, it's linked to this slider over here. Can call this wall and ball height. And notice that the input item name changes over here. Now the advantage of this is that I can also have outputs. So I have also at some point calculated the length of the line. Now I can't right click on this value. What I can do is I can put it into a number. Oh, actually, sorry, I have to put it into a panel. In this panel I can then right click and publish to remote panel. So I get this number. And what I can do is I can add a group. I can call it output. Then I can move this guy over here, and I can right click on the panel, call it, and rename it the length of the line. And well, it actually won't rename anything over here. I can insert a label, reorder it above, and double click on it or right click on it to call it length of line, and I can exit out of the edit view. So you see that I can have objects or sliders used as input, and I can also calculate something about the output. So I can minimize Grasshopper now, maximize Rhino, and I have this interface that I'm using. You know, I can use a slider to vary the wall height and the ball height, and I can also take some points and delete them and watch the length of the line be recomputed. And so this is a way to, having set up that process, I'm now making geometry, I'm processing it and I'm making some forms, I'm analyzing it and getting some data about it. I'm both representing the data as text here on the screen, but I'm also using this interface. And this is kind of the core setup of a tool, a workflow, one of several, but one that I found to be very helpful. And if you can plug those things together, again, it's the geometry pipeline, it's the preview component, it's the Flounder camera that syncs the camera together, and then it's the remote panel that externalizes these interfaces out here. Then that's kind of what you can use to modify other things, like, you know, whether it's to make a bridge, to make a pattern, to do some analysis, to incorporate GIS with other tools. that's a good framework with which to start to use and make new tools.